They came to the White House as wives of the world's most powerful men. But many of America's first ladies wielded considerable power in their own right. Every presidential spouse has made the role her own and often found a place in the nation's heart. Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, was the most beloved and influential First Lady in history. When her husband contracted a debilitating disease, Mrs. Roosevelt became his frequent stand-in at political events, despite being shy and unassuming by nature. When her husband was elected president in 1933, Mrs. Roosevelt broke with protocol to hold press conferences, present radio broadcasts, and write a daily syndicated newspaper column. Her charm and personality endeared her to everyone she met, from heads of state to lowly soldiers. When Franklin died in 1945, Mrs. Roosevelt thought her life as a public figure had ended, but she could not have been more wrong. A post-war career as an American representative to the United Nations saw her traveling the world once again as the first chairperson of the UN Human Rights Commission. In 1960, the Kennedy administration included a youthful First Lady with a distinctive sense of style. A wealthy society girl when she married up-and-coming politician John F. Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy spoke fluent French and brought an artistic eye to the White House. She charmed foreign heads of state and was adored by the American people. A restoration of the White House was a triumph of good planning and exquisite taste. Tragically, the magic of the administration known as Camelot was to be brutally ended when the president was murdered in 1963. Mrs. Kennedy was sitting next to her husband when he was shot in the head as they traveled through Dealey Plaza in Texas. She stood next to Vice President Lyndon Johnson as he took the oath of office while they flew the president's body to Washington. And she accompanied the coffin back to the White House, still in the blood-stained dress she'd been wearing when he was shot. Mrs. Kennedy played an active role in organizing the funeral that saw an entire nation in mourning. One reporter said of her poise at the funeral, "Jacqueline Kennedy has given the American people one thing they've always lacked: majesty." Another First Lady who endured her share of tribulations in the White House was Pat Nixon, the wife of President Richard Nixon. When her husband was elected president in 1968, Mrs. Nixon gave everything to her role as First Lady. She promoted a number of charities and traveled the world by her husband's side, notably to Communist China for an historic visit in 1972. Mrs. Nixon never liked political life, but endured it for the sake of her husband's ambitions. The Watergate revelations brought his administration to an ignominious end.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
And she was at his side when he resigned the presidency in disgrace, following revelations that his aides had been carrying out illegal activities.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully...
Rosalind Carter was beautiful, vivacious, and unpretentious. She and her husband Jimmy were openly devoted to each other and their young daughter Amy. At the president's 1977 inauguration, Mrs. Carter wore a 6-year-old dress and packed a picnic lunch for the day. During the Carter presidency, she sat in on cabinet discussions and represented him in meetings with world leaders when he was unavailable. She wrote policy and promoted legislation, as her successor Hillary Clinton would do a decade later. Mrs. Carter also followed First Lady tradition by using her position to support a range of charities. Her successor, Nancy Reagan, underwent a baptism of fire in her first term as First Lady. In 1981, her husband Ronald Reagan was wounded in an assassination attempt. She later wrote in her diary that her life would be over if he died. Both former film actors, the couple counted many Hollywood greats as their personal friends. Like Jackie Kennedy, Mrs. Reagan was renowned for her glamour and love of high-end fashion. Her favorite causes included drug prevention campaigns and the foster grandparent program. When Alzheimer's disease affected the president during his second term in office, Mrs. Reagan wielded substantial power and was criticized for moves such as consulting an astrologer for personal and political advice. She was fiercely protective of the president and stood by him for the rest of his life.